Alright, it's time to talk about this eternal arcade classic. Oh, Pac-Man, what is there to say that hasn't been said already? I mean, this game is legendary for being the first or one of the first major hit games from Japan in the US, and for having the first, original and real video game character mascot. Since, before this, most games had you playing in, a ship or a generic dude. But here comes along this yellow ball who has a mouth and is quite hungry. And to satisfy that hunger, he ate up many of people's quarters. And I mean, people were just so happy to give it to him. Now, that's not to say that there weren't any other, popular games out at the time. It's just that this one stood so high above the rest that, the highest they went was, to a high building, where this one was out in the stratosphere. I mean, what other game, especially from this era, had a whole entire song made about it? Actually, scratch that. This entire album is actually about other arcade games. But I mean, Pac-Man is still the one that went all the way to freaking number 9 on the top 100 charts. But enough about how well the game did. It's time to shift gears into talking about the actual, game. You know, how it plays, how good it is, how does it hold up all these years later, and what do I personally think about it. Because, as I always like to say, just because something is immensely popular doesn't always necessarily mean good. Anyway, the game sees Pac-Man as he is put into a board of pellets that he must eat, all of which to get to the next level. But he is not alone, as he is chased by 4 different colored ghosts named Blinky, Pinky, Inky, and Clyde, all of which are trying to kill you by running into you, but indirectly for the most part, as they all have a different way of trying to get you cornered. And you gotta play smart to avoid that. You know, learn each ghost's, pattern. Or if you're feeling like you need to go on the attack, you can go for one of the big power pellets, which then vulnerabilize the ghosts, allowing you to eat all of them. But here too, you have to be smart with them because there's only 4 in the level, and they don't last forever. Instead, ranging from 5 seconds to 3 seconds to not even doing anything at all in the later stages. And the ghosts aren't permanently gone after they're eaten, they're just gonna respawn back in the middle. But yeah, that's really the whole game. You just have to get rid of all the pellets before the ghosts can get you. But of course, another big goal that you need to do, since this is an arcade game, is get as high a score as you can, which would also reward you with many extra lives. And you definitely needed those unless you wanted to just keep pumping quarters into the machine. Now, points you would obviously get for eating the pellets, as well as the ghosts, but every once in a while, I don't know how often, there would be a fruit that spawns in the middle of the map that if you get to, it would give you an extra whatever amount to your score. Alright, the last major thing to talk about is the cutscenes that this game actually has. Yeah, every few levels you get these animations of Pac-Man and the ghosts. I guess telling the story of him being chased and fighting back. And eventually, in a weird twist, you find out that these aren't actually ghosts, but weird, honestly, I don't know, some weird creature. Definitely really unique for a game back then. Anyway, in the end, it is easy to see why many people gravitated towards this game, with its unique main character and easy to learn but hard to master gameplay loop. Well, that was back then at least. How does it stack up today? Well, for starters, you're definitely not going to be playing this in any arcade. You're more than likely going to play it on your phone or on a modern day console or possibly even through an emulator. But that's not to say that there's never going to be an opportunity where you play this in an actual arcade. You may stumble upon it and have as much as an authentic experience as you can with it. But I will say, when it comes to those home versions, it will basically be just the arcade game with nothing cut out or reduced in any sort of way, unlike the home ports of yesteryear, where you were lucky if the game was even playable. Another advantage of modern ports is the availability of softening the difficulty, where you could change how many lives you start with, what level you start on, and how much points you need to get an extra life. Or I guess if you wanted to go in the other direction and make it as hard as possible by reducing everything. I guess the other big difference is that the high scores now are not just limited to one machine and only 10 people. But now you could see how good people are from all around the world thanks to the leaderboards, and see how well you stack up. Alright, with the modern amenities out of the way, it's time to move on to the negatives of this game. The first of which is that the game has no real music, which outside of the opening theme, all you have is like sounds of him eating the pellets and a siren sound when you're not. A constant siren sound, I might add, that actually, I can make the argument, gets annoying after a while. But at least this one is forgivable since most arcade games don't have music in them. Another bad thing about this game is that although I did say earlier about all the modern stuff added in to make the game easier, it's still at the end of the day an arcade game. Like, it's still set up to be as cheap as possible so that way it could kill you easily and then take as many of your quarters as possible. But obviously you're at home, you have no quarters to put into it, so then you just get screwed over, since the game was never reprogrammed for home play. But I guess I can excuse this one too, because I mean, it's a re-release of an arcade game. You expect that from those types of games. But I would say that the biggest negative of this game is just that it's way too simple and repetitive. Which again, I get, this is an arcade game, those are like that. But it's just that it's always the exact same board, the exact same amount of pellets that you need to get, and the exact same ghosts always going after you. And because of all these factors, it becomes one of, if not only, an arcade game that can be perfected. Like, you can learn the patterns of the ghosts and when to go for the power pellets and allow yourself to just breeze right through the game. I mean, there's proof in this in the fact that many players have, even back then, figured out a way to get all the way to level 256, which is often considered like the last level, since the game ends up glitching because obviously they never expected you to get that far. And well, I guess this point comes down to personal taste, because I know there are people who like perfecting stuff, like getting it as right as you can, but I'm not one of those people, so I consider this a negative. But of course, having said all this, I still think that the game is enjoyable even all these years later. But that is in a general sense, while my own personal taste, I would have to say that, well, this game never really hooked on me, I guess. I was never really into this game, or even today, really. But at the end of the day, it's still a good game, and I could see why people are still into it. I guess it's just not for me. I guess another way of wording it is I never caught a case of Pac-Man fever. And I guess that wraps up the review. And in the end, although I may not personally have the highest regard for this game, I still cannot deny its legacy, impact, and longevity. Although I may not be the biggest fan of the original Pac-Man, I do love the Championship editions, which I guess is on some level of irony, right?